Welcome to episode 2. Today we move into Devil's Den State Park, where water takes a different form. Here, Lee Creek moves through stone, shaping caves, valleys, and time itself. This water in motion, quiet, constant, and powerful. If you sit beside Lee Creek long enough, something starts to shift in how you experience it. At first it feels calm, almost steady, the kind of place you might assume nothing is happening beyond what you see. The water moves, but it doesn't demand attention in the way a waterfall does. It doesn't crash, it just flows. And because of that, it's easy to underestimate what it's actually doing. But water is never really still, even when it looks like it. Even when the surface seems calm enough to reflect the skies or the trees along the bank, movement is always happening. Here at Devil's Den State Park, Lee Creek is constantly working on its landscape. It slides over rocks, bends, and slowly reshapes the channel it flows through. Most of that change is too small to notice in the moment. Over long periods of time, it becomes the reason this place looks the way it does. The caves, the narrow passages, the carved sandstone formations, they are all part of that slow process. That process is happening right now. Over thousands of years, water has cut into this landscape layer by layer. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, through repetition. Each storm adds a little more energy. Each season adds a little more movement. And over time, that becomes enough to reshape solid rock into something that feels sculpted. But it isn't sculpture in the human sense. There's no plan or design behind it. It's just persistence interacting with material that slowly gives way. The difference matters, because it changes how we think about strength. Water here is not strong in the way we usually define strength. It doesn't force its way through stone. It doesn't break everything instantly, but instead, it finds its weakness that already exists and gradually expands them. That is what erosion actually is. Not destruction in a single moment, but transformation over time. Lee Creek also creates variation in the landscape that supports life. As water moves through each different speeds and depths, it forms ripples, pools, and pockets. Each of these areas support different organisms. In faster moving sections, oxygen levels are higher, which support certain aquatic insects and fish species. In slower sections, sediment settles and creates a different habitat. Even the temperature of the water can shift depending on shade, depth, and flow. So, what looks just like a creek is actually patchwork of micro-environments, each shaped by how the water moves. That diversity is what keeps the system alive. If something changes upstream, like pollution, sediment, or changes in flow, the entire stream responds. The water temperature can rise, turbidity can increase, and species that depend on specific conditions can disappear. And those changes don't stay isolated. They move downstream just like the water itself. So even though the creek might feel local, it's actually part of a much bigger network. It connects to the waterways, other ecosystems, and eventually large river systems across the region. There's also something about that time here that feels different when you start paying attention. Because the landscapes you're standing in is not finished, it's still being shaped. The rock formations are not fixed in their final form. They are part of an ongoing process that didn't stop when people arrived and won't stop when you leave. That idea became easy in places like this because everything looks stable at first glance. The trees are rooted, the cliffs feel permanent, the creek follows a path. But stability is only temporary in geological terms. Even the cave systems in Devil's Den are not complete. They are still slowly changing and still being shaped by water moving through cracks in the stone. That means what you're seeing is not a finished product. It is a moment in time on a much larger scale. And that's part of what makes this place interesting to interpret, because it forces you to slow down your idea of change. Not everything changes quickly enough to notice in real time. Some things require distance, years, decades, centuries to actually understand. Water is one of those things. It doesn't just move through the landscape. It teaches you how long it changes and when it's consistently happening, but quietly. That connects something bigger about how systems work in general. Because of what the water is doing here, finding weak points, gradually reshaping structure, responding to resistance, it is the same basic pattern you'll see in a lot of natural systems. Small actions repeated over long periods of time can produce large changes. It's not dramatic, it's cumulative. Devil's Den also shows you how water, closely, and life are connected in these systems. These creeks support fish, amphibians, insects, plants that depend on stable water conditions. These conditions depend on the surrounding forests and rain and the geology of the land. That's why places like this are often sensitive than they appear. Small changes in water quality or flow doesn't just affect the creek, it affects everything that depends on the creek. In a way, it makes the creek feel less like a separate feature than the landscape. It's part of it. What stands out here, especially after spending time and listening, that the water doesn't really behave like a background feature. Even when it feels subtle, it's still active, shaping, moving, whether or not you're paying attention. Maybe that's the larger idea, that influence doesn't always need to be real loud. It just needs to be consistent. Lee Creek doesn't need to announce what it's doing. It just keeps doing it, and over time, it becomes enough to shape its entire landscape. So when you stand here, looking at the creek, what are you really seeing? It's not just the water passing through a park. You're seeing time and motion. You're seeing change that doesn't stop. And you're standing in a system that is still becoming what it will be.